Valencia.
The first hand of interest, we have Jack 10 offsuit in the cutoff, and there's 1, 2, 3 limpers to me. They must not realize how I operate. I raise to 12. They must also not care because the button, small blind, and all the limpers call. Flop comes pretty weird. It's 3, 3, 3. We all check around. The early position players could still be slow paying a 3, but I'm not too worried. The turn is a jack, giving us a boat, and now the small blind leads out for 45. Nothing to do but just call, and the button folds, so now we're heads up. The river is a 2, and now the small blind checks to me. I don't think there's any way he does this with a 3, so it's time to get some value from any lower boats. I make it 100, and he just folds. Off to a good start. We win a couple other hands after this one, but there's way crazier hands in this session, so those didn't make the cut. Now onto this hand, we have ace-8 of clubs on the button. The under the gun makes it $10, and there's 4 calls. This is way too juicy of a spot to squeeze, so I make it $75 to punish all of the dead money callers. And unfortunately, the under the gun player goes all in for 100. I didn't realize his stack size. And then the under the gun +1 player goes all in for less at 69. It was probably a bit of an overplay raising, but honestly I'm not too mad about it. At this point I have like insane odds I have to call. I throw in the other $25 thinking I'm behind, and the under the gun +1 player flips over a queen, and of course the flop comes a queen. Then the under the gun player flips over pocket 5s, and it turns a 5. So we are third place in this one. On to the next one. In the very next hand, there's 2 limps to me in the cutoff. They never learn. I have ace queen, so I punch the limpers and raise to 15. The small blind and both limpers call. The flop comes ace 3, 7, and they check to me. With top pair on a super non-threatening board, I make it 20, and the small blind and under the gun call. Turn is a king, and they check to me again. Still going for value, I make it 50, and just a small blind calls. I'd noticed she was calling down super light in other hands, and she was calling often, so I plan on going for value on any river card. The river's a 6, and sticking with my plan, I bet 70 and she calls. We show our cards and she mucks. Nice to get 3 streets of value here. Couple hands later, we have a beauty, pocket kings. There's a passive player who hadn't been raising too much, who makes it 25 under the gun, and I'm next to act. It's a pretty big bet, so I decided to get sneaky here and just call with so many players behind. Turns out to be an awful decision as 4 people call behind. Flop comes 4, 9, deuce, pretty harmless if there weren't 5 other people with random ass hands. The pre-flop raiser checks to me, and I bet half pot for 75, and the cutoff and pre-flop raiser call. Now I'm a little suspicious. When the turn comes at 3, the pre-flop raiser now leads for 100. Still have way too good of a hand to call, but I'm feeling a little weird about this one. And then the other player in the cutoff just goes all in for 575. And the lady in front of me starts thinking. I already know I'm getting the fuck out of there, so I just get to sit and wait and scold myself for letting all these fucking donkeys come behind and hit their sets and straights or 2 pairs by not raising pre-flop like an idiot. Anyway, she calls and I fold immediately. Turns out the all-in player had 9s for flop top set, and the other caller had 5s for an open and a straight draw. Alright, back to punishing passive ass players and raising pre-flop. Back to our regularly scheduled program of raising pre-flop. There's 1 limp to me, and I have ace 2 of diamonds. I make it 12, and there's 4 callers. Flop comes queen, 8, king, 2 diamonds, and the small blind leads for just 11. We've got the nut flush draw, so that's not going to be enough. I raise to 50, and everyone folds but him. The turn comes a 7, but it's not a diamond. So when he checks to me, I want to keep blasting. I want to make it big here, so if I make the flush on the river, I can get value, and if I miss it, I can make an even bigger bet and really put some pressure on this old guy. Or he might just fold right now. I bet 100, and he folds ace 10 immediately. Pretty nice result. Alright, this is one of the weirdest hands I've ever played, so get ready. It checks to me in the low jack, and I have ace 10 of spades, so I raise to 10. 2 players call behind me before the small blind re-raises to 45. The big blind was mid putting his $10 in the pot after, while the small blind was raising, so the dealer makes him keep it in, and he folds. Given the smallest raise size, and I have a hand that can make the nuts, and I know the players behind won't re-raise and one of them will likely even call, giving better odds, I decide to call, and both players behind call, so we've got a juiced up pot. The flop comes 5 deuce 7 with 1 spade. The small blind checks to me, and I don't know what I was thinking with this bet, but I bet $50. I guess the flop was pretty weak, so I may have been taking a stab at it, but if that's the case, my pass-off was a pussy and didn't make it near big enough. The 2 later players call, and now the small blind goes all in for 108. At this point, I know the 2 passive players behind don't want this pot, so I'm calling, and I'm pot committed with 2 overcards and a backdoor flush draw. I guess I'm going for it. I call, and so do the other 2 players. The turn gives us another spade, but no reason to continue betting into an empty side pot unless we hit on the river, so we check, and so do the others. The river gives us no help with the queen. I check in defeat, and we all check. The allin player flips over the same hand as us, looking victorious, and when the other 2 don't show, it doesn't look like they have much, so I show the same ace high hand. There's no way.
You guys are shocking.
There's no way.
That's so sick.
Oh my god.
We both had a draw.
Yeah.
No, there was no draws.
You were getting free roll hard.
Drawing out a pair or something.
We had runner outs. It was runner outs and 2 overcards and
Right, yeah.
Runner out.
The standard, you know.
Yeah.
That was fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree, dude. That was fun for us too, playing like an absolute donkey and getting rewarded $150. Okay, now let's win with an actual hand. I have king 10 of hearts in the hijack, and the low jack makes it 10 before me. I just call, and there's 4 other callers. The flop comes 9-7-2, but they're all hearts, so we just flop a flush. It checks to me, I bet 20, obviously trying to charge like the ace of hearts or any other heart draws that might want to come along. And the cutoff and button both call. The turn is a 5 of hearts, so if there's an ace of hearts, it got there, but that's the only hand I'm worried about. I bet 50, and the cutoff goes all in for about 150. And I just call. You got the ace?
Of course.
That's king.
Oh, wow.
Big question.
Okay, this next one we've got jack 9 of clubs. There's a $5 straddle under the gun and 2 calls before the button pulls a play out of our book and raises up to $25. He's a competent player, so I know he's capable of a lighter squeeze play here, and I don't want to call out of position with this hand, so I 3-bet him to 85. He's the only caller. Flop comes 6-7-4 with 1 club. I bet 60. I'm pretty much betting all my hands here for a small sizing, trying to just take it down early with my range advantage, but he calls. The turn comes the 8 of hearts. Okay, now we have an open-ended straight draw, so it's the perfect opportunity to keep piling money in and repping a monster hand. I size up to 150 now. He thinks for a little and calls. Now I'm thinking in my head, I need to bluff off on the river to rep the aces and kings I would do this with. But we don't have to do that as the turn comes at 10, giving us the stone cold nuts. Now I have to figure out how I can get max value from this player. Ultimately, I decided to bet just over half pot to get a call from any of his pocket queens or jacks that would have to call in case I'm bluffing with ace king or a missed flush draw. I bet 350 and my opponent now goes into the tank. Eventually, he decides to let his cards go, and he would later let me guess his hand. I want to know what y'all think he had, so comment down below. I guessed pocket jacks since he continued for 2 streets and then tank folded on the river. But what he actually had was ace jack of hearts that turned a flush draw, and he told me that he would have bluff raised me if I bet a smaller amount on the river. So that one hurts, but still nice to take down a big pot. Next hand of interest, we're playing a 7-handed bomb pot. We've got pocket 3s, so let's see a 3 on one of these flops. Top board comes 6, 5, 10. Bottom comes 8, 3, 6. Let's go. The under the gun bets 20, and I just call since I've got nothing on the top board, and I wouldn't mind other passive players putting some more money behind in this pot. The big blind's the only other caller, and the turn is the 9 on top and bottom. They both check, and I'm feeling good about my set on the bottom. The 6 and 9 are on both boards, so it's unlikely they have a higher set unless maybe 8s, and I don't think they have the straight either, or they'd bet. So I bet 60, wanting to charge any draws. They both call. The river is an ace and a 5. Pretty horrible, as now my board has 4 to a straight and 3 to a flush, so when they check to me, I check, and I'm glad I did because the player to my right has a set of 8s to scoop the whole pot. Of course, the one hand we were really afraid of on the turn. Oh well, glad we only lost the minimum. Shortly after this hand, a nice man comes and sits to my left, and he's got this super cool card protector that I wanted to show off to y'all. I think it's like a pair of cherries or something like that. Yeah, we'll go with that. A couple hands later, we look down at ace jack and there's an under the gun open and 1 call. This is right on the cusp of hands I would squeeze with, but since it was an early open, I decided to just call, and 2 more players also make the call. The flop comes a beautiful one in 10 queen king, giving us the nut straight. The pre-flop raiser bets 10, and that's not going to be enough for us, especially because this board is super crazy and he could have all sorts of really good hands. I raise it to 35 and he's the only caller. The turn is a 7 and he snap checks. Since he could have a really good hand here, I bet about half pot looking to get even more money in, and now he thinks for a little bit and then decides to check raise to 160. This is absolute music to my ears since I have the very best hand. I think for a little now how I can get the rest of his money, whether I should re-raise or just call, and I decide to just call. My thinking was if he had a heart draw, I would want him to bluff off on the river if it missed, and if he had a set or 2 pair, I could just raise on the river and get even more money then. The river is an offsuit 5, pretty much a blank, and now he bets 250. Everything is going exactly to plan, so now I'm ready to go all in. I tank for a little bit just to Hollywood, make him think I'm have a tough decision, and then I go all in and he snap calls and flips over the same exact straight. Turns out we were both just being jackasses and Hollywooding each other just to try and get all of each other's stack, and we pretty much make like 10 bucks from this one. Pretty anticlimactic if you ask me. We're out for blood now, and what more perfect time than a bomb pot? The flop comes 10 king 4 on top and 4 5 7 on bottom, and we got some good cards in mind we'd like to see in our holding. How about 6-3 for a flop straight on the bottom? Sounds good to me. Our opponent from last hand bets 20, and we decide to raise here with such a strong hand on the bottom but nothing on top. I don't expect everyone to fold just yet, but I plan on showing max aggression down to the end to get everyone out so I can scoop the other half of the pot I don't really deserve. I make it 65. The guy next to me rubs his cherries. Yeah, those are cherries. And folds, and then one by one the rest of the table folds until the initial raiser thinks for a little bit, and then he also folds 7-4 face up for 2 pair on the bottom and a pair that beat us on the top. So that's why we use aggression in these bomb pots. On to the next one, where there's 2 limps before I look down at ace-4 of diamonds in the cutoff and raise to 15. The small blind now 3-bets me to 50. I've watched this player be one of the more aggressive ones at the table, and watched him show down king-jack offsuit one time that he 3-bet. I also think he understands that I can be squeezing light in late position to steal the blinds. The big blind calls the 50, and given the situation and the extra dead money from the big blind, I 4-bet bluff to 200. If I'm gonna bluff 4-bet, I like a hand like this that has a suited wheel ace that can flop well on a lot of boards. The small blind gets out of the way, and the big blind calls. The small blind was the main one I was worried about having a good hand, but just as I imagined, he was just trying to raise me light. The big blind, who called, was a super passive calling station, so you could have all sorts of stuff here. The flop comes king queen 10, and the big blind checks to me. With this board being pretty good for a 4-bet pot, I decide to check back and see what my opponent does on the turn and assess there. Turn comes a 5, and he checks again. I think at this point he would have bet with a good hand, and I could just tell he really didn't like the hand that he was holding, so I bluff 200 and he folds pretty quickly. Pretty nice to win that one with just ace high. Next hand, we have pocket 10s in the big blind. There's 3 limps before it gets to my option. Time to piss some people off. I make it 17 and just 1 middle position player calls. As if tonight couldn't go any better, we flop a set when it comes 10-8-3. I continue for 20 and he calls. The turn is another 10, giving us quads. I check my hand again to pretend like I don't know what I have, and then check back, since it's hard for my opponent to really have anything on this board. He checks back, unfortunately. The river is a 9, and I check again, hoping to induce a bluff since I can tell he really doesn't have much, and my opponent starts grabbing some chips before just checking back. Oh well. I play a couple more hands before cashing out and calling it a successful night. Alright y'all, that's gonna do it for this one. That was a really fun session. I played for 8.5 hours. The conversation was honestly great at the table. So I was just willing to just keep playing, honestly. And we had a good win too. Honestly, I really liked the way I played today. I was focused, got some good rest, and showed up, you know, in the right mindset. That really helps. There's been times where I've come to the Cardhouse and I was like hungover from the night before, stuff like that. And I mean, you can tell like when you're just not focused and not playing right. And today was not one of those days. So we were in the game for 300, out for 1330. So profit of 1,030. Looks like things are trending in the right direction. Recovering some of that money from the 2-5 session, and so that's great. But yeah, that'll be it. If y'all made it this far, thanks so much. I appreciate you for watching. And like and subscribe if you want to see some more. See you on the next one. Peace.